Good morning, Mike Heyworth.
Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Thank you for having me back here at CBA Towers. It's always a pleasure to be here. Today, this interview is going to be different from most interviews that I film with archaeologists, in so much as this is a follow-up. We've already met you, we already know about you and about this organisation. And I specifically, when I first got in touch with you, I really wanted to try and use this as an opportunity to get a sense of where we are, especially following the recent general election. I suppose, first of all, as the head of the CBA, that's the Council of British Archaeology for those of you at home, what were you expecting going into the general election? Were you expecting a robust conversation about archaeology?
Obviously it was a fairly snap general election.
Yeah.
It came a little bit out of the blue. We didn't have any plans for assuming there was going to be an election around this time. Most people assumed that the majority of the conversation around the election would be about Brexit, and therefore we had things to say because there are some really important issues around Brexit that will affect archaeology. There are all sorts of other issues which we didn't think were probably going to play very strongly in this general election. But of course, every party produces a manifesto that sets out their plans for the next parliamentary term, which is in theory another 5 years. And we've tried hard to influence those manifestos, and we've started to think hard about how we can work with politicians in a new parliament. So every time there's a parliamentary election, there's opportunities to raise the flag for archaeology, and we need to think how we do better at influencing policies next time around.
Okay. Now, in that sense, I suppose, how did you feel? I suppose also people like the Heritage Alliance also keep an eye on these things. How did you feel? Not just about this election, but also the previous one, was 2 years ago, in terms of representation of archaeology and heritage in manifestos. I mean, certainly from my perspective, it seems to have been tackled almost typically from a planning perspective, essentially archaeology as inhibiting economic growth. I mean, do you think that these issues can be sort of, I suppose, sold to the electorate in a way which isn't quite so bounded in economics?
I think they can, but I'm not sure that the general election is the moment to do that, because the election is focusing on the policies that the government is going to pursue. So inevitably what we're trying to say is, well, here's how government can help us, or not hinder us. And sometimes it's about unintended consequences. So the focus at general election times is around government policies and legislation. And of course, CBA is a UK-wide organisation. We have to remember that the general election really is only having an impact from our perspective on England. It's a devolved situation. Heritage and archaeology really is, from a Westminster government perspective, is largely about what's going on in England. So that's a factor. But also we have to remember that there's a lot of material that's relevant to us that's not necessarily about what's going on in Parliament. If we're trying to encourage more engagement, more public engagement, and trying to change the impression of what archaeology is all about, you wouldn't necessarily do that through a sort of party political lens.
But politicians are so popular now. Okay, well, I suppose in that sense, the broader issues then beyond the general election, as you say, it was a snap election. Of course, they had to focus in on some key issues, but clearly there are some unavoidable. There's one big unavoidable ship coming our way in the shape of the Brexit negotiations, and how, ranging from, for example, funding, access to student programs across the continent, access to the best talent in that sense, and also the willingness of different countries now to work together on especially European-funded projects. What sort of role do you think you will be playing in the coming years, I guess, in trying to get a good deal? I mean, people keep on talking about deals, and I find that slightly unfortunate, but it's the place that we're in, I guess. I mean, in that sense, do you consider yourselves to be, as it were, a lobbyist, or will you be working with other, for example, NGOs to try and hash out maybe a new model for this sort of cross-continental cooperation?
I think it's really important that we see it as an opportunity as well as a potential threat. and it's an opportunity for us to set out how we can manage and enjoy and appreciate the historic environment more than we do at the moment. The level of engagement up till now, we've been heavily involved in discussions with government at Westminster about the potential implications of Brexit. The Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport has held 2 round tables which archaeologists have been represented at, invited to attend. And that's meant an opportunity for us to put across some of the real concerns we have about the possible implications of Brexit. And so the government can think at an early stage about how it could mitigate those concerns. And obviously they're principally around losses of access to funding, about potential situations where we won't have the opportunity for European archaeologists to come and work here, and indeed vice versa as well. And other issues around legislation. So we need to influence those conversations. I'm not naive enough to think that when Theresa May goes off and starts negotiations with European partners about the implications of Brexit, that archaeology will be top of her list.
Send you a quick text.
I don't think we'll be quite in that position. But actually, many of the issues that we're concerned about are big issues that affect many other professions and disciplines too.
Well, actually, in that sense, then I suppose, because obviously the Department for Culture, Media and Sport is the key oversight in this country in terms of archaeology as a cultural resource. But also archaeology, I think, clearly has a big scientific interest. I mean, an awful lot was made about scientists for the EU during the Brexit campaign, and trying not to lose, I think the estimates were about a third, maybe even half of big pot funding. Is there other opportunities here to, I suppose, work with partners who you might not ordinarily have worked with? For example, people who work in even chemistry and biology and this kind of thing, to actually create a broader consensus on the fact that actually archaeology needs scientific funding as much as it needs departments of culture, media and sport funding.
Sure. No, I mean, there was a report came out a couple of weeks ago by the main sort of bodies in this country that oversee sort of knowledge and research, so the Royal Society and the British Academy, and they were looking at the potential impact on all academic disciplines on the loss of research funding from the EU. And archaeology was the most affected out of every academic discipline. And that's partly because we've been very successful in attracting research funding from Europe, partly because we're world leaders in the discipline, and our work is in many cases inevitably international in scope. So it's no surprise that perhaps we're collaborating with European partners more than many other disciplines. But of course that's a big threat for us, because if that funding source dries up, over 50% of the university research funding at the moment for archaeology in the UK comes from Europe. If that's lost, that has huge implications for the capacity of archaeology departments across the country to undertake research and then to do teaching based on that research. So that's potentially really bad news for us. So we need to be working with other disciplines, and of course archaeology is a bit of a magpie discipline. It's not an art, it's not a science. We do bits of nearly every discipline under the sun. And we work very closely with other organisations, environmental partners in other NGOs. So I think we do that joining up quite well, and it's about making those, if you like, lobbying voices heard at a high level, because it isn't just archaeologists saying it; it's archaeologists plus a whole range of other people that the government listens to.
And I think we'll come back to this idea, I guess, of professional confidence towards the end of our interview. But in that sense, it does seem to be a key issue there, in terms of making sure that the voice is heard, and it's not just like a hello in the corner. It's actually a booming voice archaeology. But I suppose a related issue in terms of reaching out to other scientific interests, but also, for example, NGOs, would also actually be, to what extent are you concerned about, or are you pursuing the continuation, for example, environmental regulations that enable archaeologists to do their jobs, but also archaeological sites to be protected? I mean, is this, of course, there's the so-called Great Repeal, but beyond that being enacted, clearly there'll be a vulnerability there within the country. Is there also a role in terms of the legislation, not just the effect of legislation?
Yeah, sure. Most of our heritage protection legislation is national, not international. So most of that is not going to be affected by this process. There are some specific things like strategic environmental assessments or environmental impact assessments which come from European legislation, and that will have to be brought into UK legislation and into devolved legislation as well in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which is something we have to sort of think through. So there are some aspects of that are important. But I think there's a really big opportunity here, because working with our environmental partners for the natural environment, they've got much stronger protections in this country based on European directives, the Habitats Directive in particular, which is very strong, much stronger than anything we've got for the cultural heritage. Now, when that's brought into UK legislation, one of the things that I'm talking to a lot of people about at the moment is there an opportunity to see that as environment-wide? So it potentially cuts across into the cultural heritage, into the historic environment, as well as the natural environment. And I think there maybe is an opportunity, working particularly with some of the environmental NGOs that we're doing at the moment, to see if we can have better environmental legislation, which is to our advantage as well. And interestingly, in the Conservative Party manifesto for the election, they pledged that when over the course of the government period, that the environment would be left in a better state than it was at the start. So there's a strong message there that we can build on from the party that's now going to lead the government, that they take environmental concerns seriously, and it's up to us to show them how they can do that.
True, but I suppose there's also the infamous side of this, in so much as, for example, when it comes to environmental protection, the newts, the great crested newt is one of the ones that is often thrown out as being bad for the economy because it prevents development. And it's one of these unnecessary EU regulations because the newt is not actually that uncommon in Britain, and blah blah blah. So there's obviously a nuanced discussion there to be had about the balance of that rule. But nonetheless, you do have people expressing an interest in actively changing these protections to enable, in particular, development. Do you think that then, I mean, obviously there is an opportunity, but do you think there's also going to have to be a fairly ardent, as it were, defence of some of these things?
Of course, it's a threat as well as an opportunity. And there are, particularly again within the Conservative Party, there's a strong view from many politicians that there's a deregulatory opportunity here, and we have to look hard at the potential impacts of that. I think one of the best weapons we have on our side in that regard is actually public opinion, because I think there's huge public support for archaeology. And if you went out and talked to many people in the street and asked them, do you want all these regulations to be swept away so that in the future developments can take place and just destroy archaeology without it ever being recorded? I don't think people would want that. And I think we allegedly live in a democracy, and government listens to what the people want. I think that's one of the areas I think we need to do more, is actually to show politicians the breadth and the depth of public support for what we do as archaeologists. What does become an issue is where a particular party is proposing a policy or some legislation in another area that has an impact on archaeology, and planning is the obvious one. Where over the last couple of years we've had two planning acts which have had elements within them that we were concerned about, that were effectively weakening heritage protection for archaeology, and we've made those points very strongly. To be fair, politicians of all parties understood those concerns and raised them for us. But that wasn't necessarily in tune with what the government's direction was. Although by having politicians who raise archaeological points of view in debate, we often get really helpful statements made by ministers in the House, or statements then that go through into guidance and good practice advice that underpins the legislation, that actually is at least mitigating and perhaps ameliorating any potential negative impacts on archaeology. Because again, they're not setting out to damage archaeology. That's not their intention. I mean, when the neighbourhood planning bill was proposed last year, and there was the concerns about the pre-commencement conditions, there was an online petition started up which got nearly 20,000 signatures within a week about the concerns about the implications for archaeology. Well, that was fantastic. And actually, government ministers immediately got in touch with us and said, look, this wasn't our concern at all. We weren't trying to do this. Please be reassured. We'd like to work with you to make sure that when we actually put the final legislation through, it doesn't have that impact on archaeology you seem to think it's going to have.
Okay. And also that I hate to paint a picture of simply being cynical about any government's perspective, I suppose, on the past, but it has, nonetheless, as you say, especially when it comes to planning policy, it's been a pertinent point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose just sort of moving a shade, as it were, to the right, pun intended. At the moment, we are in a situation. How long it will last, who knows? Where the sitting government is basically being propped up in terms of majority by the Democratic Unionist Party. Now they have some fairly, what are being called on the news, for example, socially conservative views. But in particular, they also have some very particular views about the age of the world, human history and heritage and all this kind of thing, which has seen them intervene or attempt to intervene in, for example, in the Ulster Museum, trying to insist on creationism being as part of their public offering, and also most infamously in the Giant's Causeway Visitor Centre with the National Trust, pretty much forcing their arm to acknowledge a 6,000-year narrative as opposed to a 60 million year narrative, both being presented with equal weight almost in that place. And I have visited the centre. It's a wonderful centre, but it hovers in the air. To what extent are you concerned, or should anyone be concerned about the influence of people who simply aren't willing to acknowledge good science in terms of policy? Now, obviously, the DUP probably won't have a direct role in certainly mainland Britain policy, or say English policy. But I don't know. Are you at all concerned by the fact that this is a thing now?
I think it raises all sorts of questions, and of course some of those are concerns. There's an interesting issue about if we've got a Westminster government that's largely in heritage terms relating to policy in England, is it appropriate for a Northern Ireland-based party to influence that? Probably not. So we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, we haven't even seen the Queen's speech yet, so we don't know what bills are going to be put forward. And
I'm sure the DUP isn't going, right, we need to get our finger in that pie.
I think archaeology and heritage is on their list. But we have a concern, obviously, where people are trying to portray a view of the world that is not based on the truths that we understand and on good science.
An emergent truth.
I have real concerns about the whole sort of post-truth world that we seem to be slipping into, and that narratives can be developed and portrayed as equal truths when they're not based on good science. And I think one of that then comes down to us as archaeologists to be out there setting out our views, explaining what the basis of those views is, and contributing to these very significant potential public debates around identity, around climate change, around migration, around sort of social issues, all of which archaeology's got really strong things to say about, based on evidence, and we need to be out there saying those things.
And that's I suppose where we come round to this. As I said, we would touch on this idea of the public image of archaeology and having confidence in the profession as a profession, so on and so forth.
What we need to do better is to show what we do, which is not we're not a small technical discipline that's scrabbling around in the ground and finding things. New discoveries are great, and that is often what captures the media interest. Most of the media stories you see about archaeology are about discoveries, and there's a sort of excitement associated with that, and that's good. That's all positive sort of PR. What we're not so good at is explaining how those discoveries then contribute to new understanding, new knowledge, and how that new knowledge contributes to the 21st century debates that we're having about the future of society. We need more archaeologists actually to stand up and contribute to those discussions.
Well, in that sense, I often try, for example, I deliver a couple of lecture courses on public archaeology in that sense, and I often try and encourage students to think about archaeology as being the continuing discovery of what's new about the past, as opposed to just adding to an understood, predetermined timeline. So they can be putting out, we can be putting out that message. But also, do you think there's an argument that there needs to be more of a, I mean, you hear about this in mathematics, where people talk about there needs to be it needs to be more shameful not to know your maths, as it were, or your math if you're in the US. Do you think that's probably true for history, for general knowledge of history? For example, everything, for example, is compared to Stonehenge.
Sure. It's a frustration that no matter what you find, it has to be compared to either the pyramids or Stonehenge in some way. And that's frustrating. And obviously it'd be great if the national curriculum and the school education programme gave people a better sense of chronology. You know, it's terrifying when you see these surveys about how many people think the Vikings came before the Romans. You know, everybody should have a better understanding of where we've come from as a society. Because it's not just some dry and dusty thing that doesn't matter. It does matter. You know, one of the biggest issues that we're facing at the moment in this country is debates around immigration. Well, that was originally we were all immigrants. Thousands of years ago, there was nobody living here. In the
well, by definition, 18,000 years ago, he couldn't be here. No, exactly, he couldn't live here.
So the fact that there have been waves of migrants coming into what's now Britain is an important part of that story. And 5,500 years ago, we were joined to Europe. There was a land bridge you could walk across. Most people don't understand that, but actually that contributes to the discussions and the debates and the understanding about the population that we have here today, and about the movement of people and why that contributes to the society that we live in and helps us with the economic situations that we face. But archaeologists should be out there saying that. And speaking up, and we should be writing letters to newspapers. We should be going on news night. We should be putting ourselves forward, because there's some really good high-level academic research going on these topics, but it's known to very few people. And that's one of my frustrations, is that I'd like more archaeologists to be willing to go and engage with the media and put forward some of the fascinating things that we've discovered as archaeologists.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, in that sense, then, it sounds as though it is a case of everyone mucking in that sense. Because I suppose when I mention this idea of stop trying to justify our own existence, it seems that that's the point at which many archaeologists begin. Is they start by going, well, archaeology is important. But actually, perhaps as you say, seeing archaeology as a transformative, potentially politically liberating kind of thing, in terms of, for example, our own place in the world, that's just one way in which there's a very powerful conversation to be had there again.
Definitely. And we've been focusing quite a lot in the last few years on concerns about the number of students applying to study archaeology at university. But we've also at the same time been looking at how other disciplines have approached this. And anthropology has had an increase in the number of students applying to study anthropology at university. That's not because there are hundreds of jobs in anthropology, it's because they've portrayed that as a really interesting discipline that's about big questions. Well, actually, archaeology is just as much about big questions, and about, it brings in the arts and the sciences. There's loads of transferable skills and all sorts of other benefits to studying archaeology. It's not a vocational degree that only leads you to a potentially a single job in archaeology. But we're not getting those messages out there, and we need to work a little bit harder on that. Particularly, we're doing some work at Learn to try and improve careers advice, so that prospective students understand. One of the disasters of the loss of the A-level archaeology last year, following on from the loss of GCSE archaeology 10 odd years ago, means there's no opportunity now for anybody to study archaeology before applying to go to university. So they don't know whether it's a subject that really is going to be for them or not. And in a time when people are a bit risk averse and they're having to take out huge loans, that probably is a factor in people's thinking about whether they want to go and do archaeology or not. So we've got to counter that in the careers advice we put out, and which is influencing the parents just as much as the prospective students, to explain to them why a degree in archaeology is a really valuable thing. And it's not somebody joke leading you to a career in ruins.
Indeed, it's not. And well, in that sense, perhaps, as you say, it's not just necessarily mucking in if you are it's almost sounds like a religion, that if you're a practicing archaeologist, we're rather also the secret handshake. There are also actually, perhaps if you are an archaeologist who's gone into a variated career path. So, for example, I know of archaeologists who are working as MRI technicians, or people who go into politics even.
Yeah, of course.
Perhaps there needs some ways of reaching out to out and proud archaeologists.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're keen to do is actually to show a range of individuals who followed completely different careers outside of archaeology, but started off with an archaeology degree, and to show, well, what did that contribute to their career path? And as you say, we've got all sorts of really fantastic examples of people who are leading light of disciplines, professions, political parties, all sorts of things, and they had originally had an archaeology degree, and that contributed to where they are now. So archaeology as a degree is all about transferable skills, but at the same time it's also about helping you to think about the world.
Returning to this thread of, I suppose, self-examination as an archaeological community, is there a need for a stronger mechanism when it comes to, for example, I suppose, people often, at its worst, accuse archaeology, for example, of being a bit of a self-preservation society, not necessarily reaching out to people, but also wanting to continue doing a certain thing. And I think we've already touched on the fact that there's much more of a need for reaching out more and laying the groundwork and actually talking about what it is archaeologists do. But do you think that there's also, in that sense, the other side of that coin is the need to have a more, I suppose, concerted and focused message when it comes to, in particular, for example, interaction with those people who hold purse strings or who are making legislative decisions?
I think generally there's a fairly clear message, and it's around the fact that archaeology matters, and the public get that, and have an enthusiasm for archaeology, the process of archaeology as well as the outcome of archaeology, particularly at that local level.
And actually, before we started recording, I think we both joked about the fact you can't get in a taxi without someone going, oh yes, I wish I'd done that. So yes, there is goodwill for archaeology.
Yeah, so there's a lot of enthusiasm from that point of view. And most of the archaeological organisations at a national level are working very closely together. We're putting similar messages to government about what we're looking for from government, how they can help us, but also at the same time we're working with colleagues in other disciplines to try and make sure that we're not narrow and insular, that we are thinking about big questions and how we contribute to modern society. I think there's been a move over the last, 20, 30 years really, if not longer, to get more public engagement with what we do, the whole sort of citizen science type agenda. There are opportunities for many people to get involved through local societies, community heritage groups, often with HLF funding. There's some really successful projects which are helping community building, helping intergenerational learning, all those other things, contributing to the well-being agenda, where I think there are real strengths for archaeology if we can get those messages out there. But often our problem actually is that we're a very small discipline. We don't actually have many resources, we don't have many people to go out and do these things. So when you start to talk about some of the projects and some of the contributions we can make, it's quite hard to see how you can deliver them at a scale that really is going to make government sit up and pay attention. If you look at something like Operation Nightingale, which is well recognised now as a fantastic project, which is helping ex-service people who have trauma as well as sort of physical injuries to recover from that. Hugely beneficial to those individuals. That approach could be widened to many other sectors of society, but the archaeological sector hasn't got the capacity to do that. And one of our challenges, it's the same thing with CBA, working with young people. We have a real focus on our work with young people through our Young Archaeologists Club, some of the other projects we do. The thing that's holding us back is that we haven't got enough archaeologists who can volunteer and run the branches. And so the issues are within ourselves, if you like, and the opportunities therefore are there, and nobody's really stopping us. Government's not preventing us doing many of these things. It comes back to the fact that we need to work together as archaeologists to take forward these agendas in the 21st century.
So you don't necessarily think then that there has to be, as some voices out there argue, sort of almost like a unified face of interaction with everyone from the public to government to local communities. Do you think actually there's a way of working where the very varied groups, agendas, and even models of doing archaeology actually can keep on doing what they're doing, but maybe in a slightly more integrated way? I mean, what is that vision? What does that look like to you?
I'm not as in agreement with the British Academy, who recently produced their reflections report and suggested there should be a single voice for archaeology, and that we should all sort of effectively merge into one body. I don't think that's the way forward. I don't think that's realistic given where we are starting from, and I'm not entirely convinced that that would actually be helpful anyway. There are a number of organisations, many of them have a proud, long history, and they'll continue to do what they do. The important thing is that we work together. And I think we do that. And so, for example, in relation to political advocacy, CBA works very strongly with the Chartered Institute of Archaeologists, CIPA, and other partners through the Archaeology Forum. We have a very consistent approach to our political messaging, and we have resources that we share as appropriate. I think that's the way forward, and I think to a large extent that's working well. And you've got groups like the Archaeology Training Forum, the Archaeological Archives Forum, which are looking at specific issues where, again, a range of organisations, including national heritage agencies where appropriate, are coming together. I've been part of a couple of workshops recently that CIFA have been running with funding from Historic England, that's looking at how do we confront the 21st century challenges for archaeology. The first was on archives, the second was on standards and guidance. Those are opportunities for the profession to come together with colleagues from all these different organisations, even academia, and think together about how we approach some of these challenges and take forward opportunities. So I think we're pretty good at doing that. But as I said earlier on, the area I think we could do more is standing up and shouting about some of these things through the media, and making sure we're using all the channels that are available to us.
Okay, well, I suppose finally, I guess I'm just curious about where archaeology is going. Obviously, there is no one single voice. We've already discussed that. You're not Gandalf in that sense. But what is important, I think, is that we've just come out of essentially a decade of very pronounced difficulties. 2007 onwards, economic crisis globally had an effect on archaeology, and other issues, planning policy being tinkered with, so on and so forth. We're now at a point looking forward, going into, for example, the Brexit negotiations, and then that will lead into other uncharted waters. Where do you see archaeology being in about 10 years? What are your hopes, I suppose, at least?
I think there's a real opportunity for us, both to contribute to the wider discussions, as we've talked about, and some of the wider debates, but also to do lots of really good, high-quality archaeology across the country. If many of these major infrastructure projects are going to take off, HS2 being the biggest and the most obvious one, but lots of other ones around the country as well, those are fantastic opportunities for archaeologists. And in fact, one of the biggest challenges we're going to have is we won't have enough archaeologists to do the work. And that's a challenge for us, particularly in a post-Brexit world, but also an opportunity to go out and get more people to come and study archaeology, because there are going to be jobs. And hopefully, through some of those opportunities and some of the fact that archaeologists are in demand, we can use that as a platform to tackle some of the endemic paying conditions issues, which I think are still really problematic for us. And we're not valued as a profession in the way that we should be when it's seen through the lens of current paying conditions. And again, that's where the contractors have a collective responsibility, I think, working with other partners too within the sector to try and make sure we can try and address some of those issues. So I think there are big opportunities for us to get archaeology out there, but that all assumes that the system, the policies, the legislative base that we have is continuing. And it particularly assumes that the local authority historic environment services are there, who are often the ones that set the commissioning process up in the first place. And the big worry we have, and the big vulnerability we have, is if those advisory services are cut back even further. And local authorities are really struggling at the moment moment. In England they have to be self-financing by 2020,
Yeah.
and with all the adult social welfare concerns that they have, which are legislative concerns, statutory concerns, archaeology just doesn't figure there because it's not a statutory service.
No.
And that's the big vulnerability we have, and we've got to work harder. And possibly that's where, following the latest general election, if we're moving out of an austerity era, whatever that's going to look like in the future, we need to make the case that deliver the public benefit that we know we can. It relies on modest, very modest, and very proportionate level of public contribution to support those services, which then unlocks all of the great things that archaeology can deliver.
So in that sense then, not whatever the decade holds, the coming decade, is a programme of not necessarily hanging one's hat on big projects like HS2 as being the saviour, but rather actually an opportunity to showcase archaeology and the profession in that sense. And then out of that will come the slightly softer elements such as community engagement and so on and so forth.
I mean, I hope there'll be important sort of methodological advances and research advances. How we engage with research. Historic England are doing a lot of work at the moment on the research frameworks that have been around for a number of years now. We need to think more about how do we connect the day-to-day archaeological work that goes on in advance of development with our research questions, and so that we are contributing to knowledge, telling new stories, because that's what the public are interested in. They're not terribly interested in whether that post hole cuts that post hole in that tiny little trench. They want to know what that is telling us about our ancestors. We can do that, but we need to be more confident as a profession, as a discipline. And we need to have every member of the staff of all these organisations needs to be out there willing to contribute in the public sphere to explaining what archaeology is doing and why it matters.
Okay. Well, this has been an interesting conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
And hopefully we'll see you again in 6 years' time.
Who knows?